Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining our October JTEEN webinar. I want to say that we're excited, but we're excited to talk about anti-Semitism. We're excited to talk, we're excited to learn, we're excited whenever we can come together and share and be a resource for one another. And I think this is going to be a great opportunity for us to be able to do that. And I am thrilled to introduce our presenter, Adam Blue. I'm going to read a quick little bio because it is well-deserved and you should know exactly who he is and where he's been. So Adam graduated from Indiana University with a BA in History and Jewish Studies. He worked as the Stand With Us Senior Midwest High School Coordinator from 2018 to 2021, based in Chicago. Prior to attending university, he spent a gap year in Israel where he studied in Jerusalem and volunteered at a boarding school near Haifa. Whether as a teen leader, the president of Hillel at Indiana University, a legislative intern with the Indianapolis JCRC, a youth advisor in Chicago, or an assistant director at BBYO Passport, Adam repeatedly exhibited his personal commitment to experiential education, community engagement, and leadership development. Adam, you and I have done many of the same things. We should probably talk about a bunch of those other things too. But without further ado, thank you all for joining us, and I turn the stage over to Adam.
Fantastic. Thank you, Erica. And thank you, JTEEN, for inviting us back to be able to have this conversation. I'd like to go over, again, to recap, we're going to be talking today about anti-Semitism today and talking to teens about anti-Semitism, just to give a little bit more of an in-depth awareness of what it is that we do at Stand With Us. Through my work in the high school department, I am now the Associate Director of High School Education. I'm helping us oversee our programming as well, or develop our programming, as well as talking about some different educational strategies that we're employing with our high school students that we engage. And through our work at Stand With Us is an international nonprofit organization that educates about Israel and combats anti-Semitism. It might be worth noting that just a few years ago, we included in our mission the bit about combating anti-Semitism. You might be familiar with Stand With Us as the organization that is Rah Rah Israel online. You might be familiar with our work. You might be familiar with our pamphlets. Maybe you've even had a Stand With Us High School, Kenneth Leventhal High School intern in your community. But what we are doing with those students previously was empowering them with knowledge about Israel, to talk about Israel, to talk about misconceptions about Israel, to be able to go to their college campuses, to be able to address the various needs on college campuses to combat anti-Semitism related to anti-Israel hate. And unfortunately, what we have noticed as an organization, and what we have probably all noticed as youth professionals, is that the issue of anti-Semitism is not contained to the issue of being anti-Israel. The issue of anti-Semitism is affecting our students in newer and newer ways every single day. And so in order to be able to combat that, in order to be able to address that with our teens, we needed to take a step back and actually focus our efforts on combating anti-Semitism in more classical terms, an issue that I personally didn't actually think was going to be my job when I first started at Stand With Us. But I'm very fortunate that we do have that opportunity to work with so many students and to be in a space where we get to support them in dealing with these variety of issues. So that leads me to why are we here today and what are we going to be talking about? I mentioned that I want this presentation to focus a little bit on storytelling, a little bit on a discussion, and a little bit on sharing resources of how we are speaking with teens about this issue of combating anti-Semitism. But one of the things that I want to introduce in our discussion, and that I want us to all start to feel comfortable with, even though the only voices we've heard so far are Erica's and mine, unless you were here for our brief discussion about Eric's lunch and Kara's participation in earlier events. But we were just kibitzing. And so the only voices you may have heard so far would be Erica and mine. And so what I want us to start to feel comfortable with, and I'm going to do that by sort of setting out some expectations and maybe some community standards for us. I want us to feel comfortable with defining our terms. I am assuming that we are all from different communities. We've already heard I'm in Chicago, and except for Eric, who is on the other side of my wall, I know that we are all in different places. And so I want us to be comfortable with defining our terms. I want us to feel like we can include each other by using the same language and when necessary, defining for each other what it is that we're talking about. It takes barely an extra second to define a term, but you can really make someone feel excluded by speaking a language that they don't know. The other thing I want us to set up as a community expectation is some feedback that I received, and I'm still salty about how I received it, but it's some of the best advice that I've ever gotten, and that is to step up and to step back. And so I'd like to invite everyone to be willing to share their voice with us. If you're someone who tends to jump in and be the first to respond, maybe take a beat and let people think through their thoughts before you jump in with an answer. But then also, if you're someone who tends to take a second before you answer, I want to push you to maybe share with us, because we're all going to grow by hearing each other's voices in this session. I was one of the people who needed to take a step back. I was told that it was fine. It was a good way. I needed to be told, but it's really wonderful advice, and I would recommend it here as well, so that we all feel comfortable. And I also want to encourage everyone to speak either from I statements or about their own experiences in dealing with their students. One of the things that I'm going to get to is that we are all coming from different backgrounds, and we all have these different communities that we're working within. While the issue of anti-Semitism is something that we should all be ready to stand up to, it's also something that we all need to acknowledge that we are not having one-to-one experiences, and it's going to require dynamic approaches from each of us as professionals, but also as individuals, as we approach these different issues in our different communities. Cool, so with that, I'm going to begin. Does anybody have questions, comments, concerns, or feelings before we get started? Cool, great, fun. At any time, I would like to invite anyone to feel free to just unmute and interrupt me. And I also would like to, you know what, we're a small enough group. Can we just go around really quickly and can we just do quick introductions? Who are you? What brought you to this session? Maybe like in the context of what audiences do you work with? Why are you interested in being here today? And then also where are you? Who are you? Where are you? Why are you here? Good, everyone practicing stepping back, fantastic. I can go to the participant list and I can just go down the list if we'd like, or we can go randomly like popcorn style. Okay, so I'm going to help introduce Robin. Robin is in our chat and she is currently based in Atlanta, but is currently in St. Louis, I'm seeing, and has a Jewish education consulting firm, Jewish GPS. Fantastic, thank you for joining us, Robin.
I'm happy to introduce myself if you'd like.
Wonderful.
My name is Erin Boynton. I'm the Chief Impact Officer at the Charleston Jewish Federation. I oversee all of our engagement work. I'm a former teacher, so I do work a lot with the teens, and I work closely with Natanya Miller, who's also on this call, with the Remember Project, which is a group of teens that learn about the Holocaust, but also take those lessons to stand against all forms of hate.
I feel like I have to follow that. I'm Natanya. I'm also in Charleston. I'm the Director of Educational Initiatives. I just started in July. I was a classroom teacher for 13 years before I started this job. I work with students 0 to 18. I work with schools, and I am also beginning a partnership with the ADL to be one of their South Carolina anti-bias curriculum trainers.
Wonderful, thank you both.
I'll go. So who am I? I'm Kara, and I work for JT Connect, which is the teen social and educational program in West Hartford. So I work with teens all the time and who see this, and especially, which we'll probably get to, especially with like everything that was happening in Israel in May, this was like a very hot topic. I'm in West Hartford, Connecticut. And what brought me here? Well, I love Erica and JTEEN, and so I wanted to support Erica. No, but also I was anti-Semitism. It's funny how Erica was like, yeah, like we're so excited. Like I like learning about, I guess, I would also say I'm excited, like I like learning about ways to combat anti-Semitism and just the whole scene and just gaining more tools. And so, yeah, that's why I'm here.
I can go. I'm Mel. I am the Director of Youth Engagement at Temple Bat Yam in Newport Beach, California. So we're just a little bit south of LA. And so I teach a 7th grade class. I am the advisor for all of our youth groups. I teach confirmation. So I am, really with the teens and even a little bit, I guess, kind of all of the kids I interact with all the time. And so, talking about anti-Semitism, especially in the lens of Israel, is something that's really important to me with the teens, especially with like social media. And I graduated college in May of 2020, and then I spent a year in Israel teaching English on a Masa program. And so I was in Israel in May. And so that like experience of anti-Semitism on social media and anti-Israel and all these things like really impacted me. And so I'm really just always trying to learn more about how to help my kids through that and that experience, because we know that's not going to end anytime soon. So that's me. And Rabbi Miriam Phillips is my supervisor here. So
always great to be on a call with your supervisor. Mel forwarded me that she was going to be on this, and I'm like, I'm coming too. So because we co-teach that confirmation class together, and look, the face of anti-Semitism has changed a lot since I was a teen and I was in college, and we're really laser focused in on supporting our children, our teens in Newport Beach and Orange County, who are facing a whole lot of it and have been before it was as pervasive throughout the country. So, so we have promised them that is the focus of our teen learning this year, and now we're implementing it starting on Sunday. So this is perfect timing.
Hi, I'm Ashley Jerome. I work at Peninsula Temple Bethel in San Mateo, California. So like the suburbs of San Francisco. And I work with teens of all ages, 7th through 12th graders. So when I saw this topic, I thought, oh yeah, I really should be on this. I think the more information, the more education like I receive as an educator and as a professional, it not only benefits me, it benefits my teens and the people I work with.
And Leanne, I know that you joined a little bit late, but we're doing introductions, how you got here, why you're here, and where you're located.
I'm located in Northbrook, Illinois. I am in a way, I guess I'm Adam's supervisor, but not at work, only in his family life. I work for Congregation Beth Shalom. I've been here for 26 years. I've done everything from youth programming to now coordinating the Hebrew High School and working with senior adults. I am very interested in this topic. And think that it's important to understand anti-Semitism and how it has changed maybe the way people perceive it over time and the impact that it has on the way that we see Israel or the way that we relate to it because of Israel. And I think there's a generational component to it as well, and the way that we look at things. So yeah, I guess that's, I'm also on the JTEEN board, and think it's important for us to address this issue. So I'm happy we're doing it.
Wonderful. And also shameless plug, I believe Leanne also has a program this evening also
really
addressing
do.
anti-Semitism.
Actually from the other side, it's you know what, I'm going to put up the link if it's okay with Erica. Erica, can I do that? Is she not?
She's nodding.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't see you. It's on the people that are about to start the Charlottesville trial. And we have Senator Doug Jones and Amy Spitalnik, who are the people who are going to be responsible. Well, Amy Spitalnik's group is going to be responsible for the trial for Charlottesville. So I'm going to pop up the link in the chat. And if anybody would like to come, it's free, it's available, it's going to be a really informative evening. So,
And if I'm not mistaken, the Stand With Us Midwest office is a
yes,
co-sponsor.
You
So,
sure are.
Glad that we could knock out 2 anti-Semitic birds with 1 educational stone here in this meeting.
Absolutely. Thanks, Adam.
Absolutely. So now that we all know each other a little bit better, one of the reasons
Is Sandy there?
I had seen Sandy being here. I didn't want to put Sandy on the spot. However, if you can join us, please introduce
I'm
yourself.
going to put her on the spot. I love seeing Sandy.
Wonderful.
I'm just walking through New York City and I didn't want to I don't know. There's a lot of sounds out here. You never know. I'm Sandy Irani. I am usually based in Los Angeles, but I'm in New York at the moment. I work for an organization called Anti-Semitic America, where we teach teens about social justice issues. And I wanted to be here today because we don't actually talk about anti-Semitism in our work at Anti-Semitic America. And I feel like I've always felt like that was kind of a missed opportunity, because it is an important social justice issue that our Jewish teens are dealing with. And I always try to attend all the PD events I can about anti-Semitism, because I feel like, as many people said, the more knowledge I have on the topic, the better that I can serve the rest of our teens and continue that conversation in an impactful way. So
Wonderful. And now we're going to Hi, Susan. We've actually just all been introducing ourselves and we were about to get started, but I know it's an uncomfortable thing to join and then be put on the spot. But if you'd like to tell us, hi, who are you?
Well,
why are you here today?
For being late. I just got off another Light Up Against Anti-Semitism webinar in our community.
Wonderful.
I'm Susan Weiss. I'm from the Board of Jewish Education of Atlantic and Cape May County, New Jersey, and I run our Hebrew High program, Kulanu School of Jewish Studies. And I may have to jump off early. Sorry, I thought I could be more anonymous, but.
No worries. I'm so sorry about that, but we were just all introducing ourselves, because one of the things that I as we get started, one of the things I do want all of us to understand, and what the first activity I sort of want to walk us through is an activity that we actually did this year with our high school interns. Shameless plug for Stand With Us, but we have representation here on this call from California, from New Jersey, from New York. We're in Connecticut and St. Louis / Atlanta, obviously here in Chicago. And one of the things that the high school department does through Stand With Us is we have regional coordinators who work in all of your areas, working with interns and teen leaders, doing this kind of work, bringing this kind of information to communities. And so in the event that any of you are ever experiencing an issue, first and foremost, I'd like to say that we are a local resource. It's not just me, it's not just us here in Chicago, but one of the things I wanted to make clear was this network, this issue, this interest that we all share, it spans not only our country, but also the world, but specifically this country. Our department is also regionally located in Canada, but as we don't have any Canadians here right now, we're still going to show them love, because we love that our program is focused here in North America. But as we get started, I want us to begin by having a conversation that we had with our interns at their training conference this year. And it's about beginning to meet anti-Semitism. And a part of this story, and this really is kind of a storytelling part of the presentation, but I want to walk you through, as I start the presentation, like this. One of the things I want to walk you through is actually my experience of meeting anti-Semitism, because very, very fortunately for me, I never really felt like I experienced anti-Semitism as a teen. It was something that was kind of foreign to me. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors on my father's side of the family. My mother is from Mobile, Alabama, so our awareness of anti-Semitism from both sides of the family was very different. But growing up in the North Shore of Chicago, I really didn't feel like it was an issue that touched my life. In terms of click, there we go. In terms of meeting anti-Semitism, it was something that I always found myself sort of pursuing. It was an interest that I had. It was something that I was aware of growing up in the Jewish community. It was something that I knew how to talk about. It was something that I knew how to learn about. Again, my degrees in history and Jewish studies. I've done a lot of studying of anti-Semitism, but even when I went to college, when I went on my gap year, obviously in Jerusalem, didn't really feel it. I was surrounded by a community that was relatively always pretty supportive of Israel. Both growing up on my gap year, I went to Indiana University. For anyone who knows Indiana, it is an incredibly supportive Jewish community on that campus. It has a wonderful Jewish studies program, and if anyone has students who are looking to be studying Jewish studies, they have an excellent scholarship for incoming freshmen. I recently received an email asking that all of us alumni go ahead and plug that, so I'm plugging it. They have a wonderful Jewish studies program and excellent scholarships for incoming freshmen, Indiana University. Tell your kids. But for me, the entire time we were at university, the one anti-Israel issue that came up was the American Studies Association threatened to boycott Israel. And before the Jewish community could even say anything, the president of our university called the American Studies Association and removed Indiana from the list. They said, we want no part of this. And so all we had to do was sign a letter saying thank you. So I never even got the pivotal Jewish experience of combating BDS on my college campus. So how can we talk about anti-Semitism, or how can we prepare our students for anti-Semitism if even we ourselves haven't felt like we've really come face to face with it? And the thing that I've learned about my experience with anti-Semitism is that in order to meet anti-Semitism personally, I actually need to introduce you to my great-grandparents and to my bubby, Paula. So Paula is going to be the little girl on the right side of the photo. This is my great-grandfather, Bernard, and my great-grandmother, Manya, my great-uncle, Leo. And this is my bubby, Paula, shortly before she passed away in February of 2018. The photo is probably from 2 or 3 months before that. And so, as we heard from my bio, my time at Stand With Us began in 2018, actually over the summer. And part of my experience working at Stand With Us, and as we've adopted our mission to combat anti-Semitism, one of my experiences that I've had personally has been learning to understand and unpack my family's experiences with anti-Semitism from my perspective, not from their perspective. It was something that I was always interested in talking to with my bubby. I think all of us have heard the stories or the tropes that we need to talk to Holocaust survivors because one day our children won't be able to hear from survivors themselves, and it's on all of us to be able to hear those stories, to carry on those stories. Well, what do we do when our family members have been traumatized by those stories and they don't really like to talk about them all that much? Very fortunately, we do have recordings of my bubby giving testimony. We do have her story, but as a teen, it was always something that was difficult for me to hear about from her directly. And when I was younger, it always frustrated me. But as I got older, I realized it was probably because she was protecting herself, not because she was protecting me from those memories. So naturally, the place that I learned the most about the Holocaust, about my bubby's experience, was by visiting different sites and by visiting different museums. I think it's very interesting that the photo that I showed you is one of the photos that not only my bubby had, but one of the photos that she submitted to records at the US Holocaust Memorial Museum. Anytime I visit the museum, I find myself gravitating towards the Hall of Records. I find myself going into these meetings, going into these memorials, waiting for the opportunity to get to the section where I can look up my family, where I can see how anti-Semitism affected me. I get to see how my family's experiences, how their lives changed, and it, in many ways, helped me connect to their stories. When I was on my gap year in Israel, I took a 2-week vacation to Paris, Dublin, and London, which for a freshman in college is just, that's about all the explanation I need for why did I do a gap year. What did most freshmen do for their winter vacation? Did they go to Paris, Dublin, and London? I didn't think so. So send your kids on gap year, it's great. But when I was in London, I had the opportunity to visit, to take a little bit of a break from our travels to different museums and to different landmarks. And I found myself going to the cemetery where my great-grandfather is buried. You see, Bernard was arrested on Kristallnacht. He was taken to Dachau, and about 2 months later, he was returned to the family, and he was told to pack a bag and to leave Germany. My family is from a small town in Constance, called Constance. It's on the Swiss border. And after they rounded up that first batch of Jewish men and sent them to Dachau on Kristallnacht, they told them to get out of the country, and Bernard did. And he spent the rest of his life trying to get the family out of Germany. Unfortunately, he was unsuccessful, and he passed away in 1943. My bubby used to say that he died of a heart attack, that he died of a broken heart, but actually it was a heart attack, and so in some ways she was correct. When we look at Bernard's headstone here, we can also see that Manya is noted on his headstone, because unfortunately, since he was unable to get the family out of Constance, they were all deported in 1940, in October of 1940. And while my great uncle Leo and my bubby were saved by a French organization, my great grandmother Manya was then later deported to Auschwitz and was murdered there. And so on Bernard's headstone, we've included Manya's information. When I went to this cemetery, I didn't really understand what I was doing for it. It wasn't for me. I had made sure that the necklace that I was wearing in the photo, which you can't see, and that I actually need to have repaired, so it's not on me at the moment. It was a necklace that had been given to me by my bubby. It was the Star of David, and in the middle it said Sion. Because my bubby, her mother, her father, they had been Zionists in Germany. They had been Zionists. It was something that I was raised with. It was something that I never took, I always took for granted. I never had questions about it. I never got any pushback about being a Zionist. And for me, this pendant that said Sion, this connection, because it had belonged to my great grandmother. When I was in Jerusalem, I made sure to put it on a new chain, because as you can imagine, the chain that it had been on that was for a little old German woman didn't fit. I know it's hard to tell in Zoom, but I am not a little old German woman. I'm 6'2". And so I got a new chain, I put a new pendant on it, and I wanted to show my great grandmother and my great grandfather who didn't survive the Holocaust. I wanted to show them that I was spending my year in Israel. I wanted to show them that their dream was a reality. I wanted to show them that their daughter had survived. And I had also made sure to go to Herzl's grave before I went on my trip. I had taken a couple of stones from next to Herzl's grave, and I brought them to that cemetery in London for my trip. And all of these things, I felt like I was doing for them. I didn't know how to relate to it as an 18-year-old, well, as a 19-year-old at the time, but still. It was difficult to explain. And it was the summer after my bubby passed away, the summer that I was transitioning from my job with BBYO Passport into my job with Stand With Us, where I was actually leading a group of teenagers on a summer trip to Washington, D.C. Our focus was on hunger and homelessness. We were not talking about anti-Semitism or the Holocaust. However, you're not going to take a group of Jewish teenagers to Washington, D.C. and skip going to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. But for me, my bubby had passed away just a few months earlier. And also I said at the beginning of this, we were going to define our terms. So if I've been saying bubby and anyone has been wondering, bubby is the Yiddish term for grandmother. See, this is why we define our terms. But anyway, when we went to the museum over the summer, you can imagine I really didn't want to be there. It was going to be the first time I'd ever been to a museum like this where I couldn't either talk to my bubby afterwards or ask her about something that I found in the archives that visit. And so I really didn't want to go, but I stopped distinctly in three places. First, in the hall where they have the different stories of Holocaust survivors, because you can sit there for hours and never hear the same story twice. I stopped at the end where there's the impermanent exhibit, because it was about the Syrian civil war and the refugee crisis that, again, this was 2018. I will remind everyone that that situation is still not going well. And so I stopped there to pay attention to that impermanent exhibit. And then I stopped in the Hall of Records and I found a series of documents, some of which that I'd found before, some of which that I was looking at with new eyes. And of the things that I learned that day, one of them is that I saw that on one of my bubby's documents into the displaced persons camp that she was in, her state was listed as stateless. And it reminded me that the existence of the state of Israel means that no Jew can be declared stateless with the stroke of a pen ever again. For me, growing up in the North Shore of Chicago, someone who had always felt like he had had self-determination, Zionism didn't always necessarily make sense to me, but it was something that I always knew was part of my identity. And it was that awareness that really solidified that. The other thing that I learned that day, and the other things that I found, first of all, was this photo of my dad and my mother and my brother and I with my bubby. This is a photo on record at the Holocaust Museum. I'm the one wearing, we're both wearing checkered, colorful. Mom, what were you thinking? That was the 90s. But I'm just kidding.
I was thinking how cute you all were, and you both loved Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. So
Yeah,
don't go there.
I was gonna say, it's like, I know we're recording right now. It's not even worth lying. I distinctly remember loving that jacket. Anyway, but also that sweater. I need to see if Dad still has that sweater. Anywho, it really highlighted for me the fact that the Holocaust and these experiences, these stories that we have, the continuation of this story is in future generations. Our ability to connect to survivors, our ability to connect to these stories is important because we can carry on the legacies of these individuals. We can continue to talk about these issues in contemporary times. And it's really upon each of us to be able to be the torchbearers of those stories, not for them, but for us and for our families, for our students. Another thing that I saw, we've spoken a lot about my bubby up until this point, but another thing that we saw, or that I saw at the museum, was the identity card that my grandfather used to come to America. And I also found a number of documents associated with a woman and a child. They're not cousins, they're not people that I knew. And for the first time in 26 years, I realized that the man that I'm named after had a first wife and had a first child, and that they hadn't survived the war. And all of these things came together to weigh on me very heavily, because I understood that anti-Semitism was not something that I had necessarily come face to face with, but it was something that was deeply ingrained into my identity. It was something that I knew that I needed to combat. And it was something that I knew that I needed to stand up against from a very early age. And it took a lot of these realizations for it to become mine. And very fortunately, I've had the experience of working at Stand With Us, where I've been able to tell these stories and I've been able to share the importance of these messages. but I've also had the experience of going on my own journey to explore how anti-Semitism has affected my life. In 2018, my father and I also went back to my bubby's hometown of Constance to visit for the 80th commemoration of Kristallnacht. There we saw the old apartment building that my bubby and her family were deported from the first time. We saw the Stroppersteins, the cobblestones outside their houses that talk about their lives. We took a visit to Dachau, a day trip to Dachau, to see where my great-grandfather had spent those horrific 2 months that my bubby described. Even though her father came back, he was never the same man. And we saw in the middle of town, you can see my bubby from her trip there years earlier, an obelisk right in the middle of town commemorating the deportation of those 108 Jews who lived in the town in October of 1940. Each of their names, my family members' names, etched into this obelisk in the middle of Constance. We went on this trip, and again, it showed me the legacy of anti-Semitism was something that we needed to continue to remember. Kristallnacht was something that had happened that their community wanted to remember 80 years later, and we wanted to partake in this act of remembering with them. And it's highlighted the ways that we've continued educating our students, the ways that I've educated students. And one of the things that we need to explain first and foremost to our students is that they don't understand the roots of anti-Semitism that often affect their day-to-day lives. And so when we think about anti-Semitism, it's a combination of both history and modernity. It's an understanding of the mutation of this virus, to be a little bit too on the nose, but it's about the mutation of the virus of anti-Semitism and understanding it that helps our students move forward and learn to interact with the world that they're in today. So very briefly, I want to step outside of my story. I want to understand the relationship between history and modernity. I want us to understand that when we look at the history of anti-Semitism, we need to step perhaps all the way back to the diaspora. We need to step into biblical history to be able to understand that the Jews have been displaced, have been moved around, and for 1900 years, they existed as an oppressed minority in absolutely every country that they found themselves in, or were then again displaced from. So in every community, the Jews represent a minority population, and in most instances, an oppressed religious minority in those populations. When we think about the religious roots of anti-Semitism, we can think all the way back to what are the things that made Jews different from the ancient civilizations around them. We understand them well: belief in one God, no idol worship, the kinds of distinctions, the kind of dietary practices, these kinds of things that served to separate Jews from the rest of their community. What made Jews different also therefore makes Jews something to, like, it's very easy to otherize and then demonize something that is other and foreign. And there were already core aspects of Judaism that made Jews a distinct group. And so even from the earliest days, we can see divisions between Jews and the civilizations around them. But with the advents and with the rise of the church, and also with the rise of Islamic empires, and as we moved forward, and we're going to skip a lot of history to jump to the Middle Ages, but we are going to jump to the Middle Ages, as we look at the influences of large institutions like the Christian church, and the ways that anti-Semitism was used as a medieval tool to demonize Jews, and to ban them from land ownership, to ban them from joining certain guilds, to restrict their movements by ghettoizing them and restricting them to living in certain parts of town. Their bans on holding political office, either in Europe or in different empires. The anti-Semitic blood libel, that Jews are using Christian blood for their different matzah baking. And look, matzah is not great, but I also don't think children's blood would enhance it any. To the pogroms in the Pale of Settlement, to the destruction of Jewish property, all the way up, these executions, these expulsions, the ones that we're familiar with, each and every one of these can be traced back to having religious roots being a religious form of discrimination, a religious form of hatred based on this understanding of what is a Jew. And I'm sorry for my lighting, but apparently it's getting sunny out. Anyway, so when we're looking at the religious roots of anti-Semitism, it's important that we understand that regardless of how our students are identifying, whether they've come face to face with religious anti-Semitism or not, we often talk to our students about tropes of anti-Semitism. And if they don't understand where those tropes are coming from, they will be ill-equipped to identify anti-Semitism in their communities. And in their communities, we also need to acknowledge that Jews have been moved around and do not look like one single thing. The importance of understanding anti-Semitism first as a religious form of discrimination is important because it is not like other forms of racism, at least not in the Middle Ages. It is not important what color you were, it was important what religion you were. And as we can see, and as we know from the variety of different Jewish communities from around the world, Jews do not look like one thing, but anti-Semitism is not limited to one side of the country or one side of the world. It expands across that because Jews can be otherized on a basis of their religious beliefs. Oftentimes, we might be most familiar with this depiction of an Ashkenazi family or looking at Jews either from Central or Eastern Europe. And this is often what people think of when they think of Jews. This is often what people say Jews are. And it's incredibly important to acknowledge the Eurocentric aspect of this harmful stereotype that Jews are not exclusively looking like one thing. However, as we approach the 20th century, we do need to understand the way that anti-Semitism mutates to have the pseudo-scientific approach of the Nazis and to undertake a racial tone. All of the sudden, Judaism is not something that you can convert out of. It's not something that you can escape. You can't stop being a Jew by saying, I renounce my faith. It's now something that's in your blood. This pseudoscience, this social Darwinism was incredibly harmful for Jews, obviously, who experienced the persecution of the Nazi regime, but also we can see the ways that anti-Semitic stereotypes and tropes were shifted from being about Jews on a religious basis, and now it was something that was part of their character. It was something that was racially instilled. It was something that they can no longer escape. And so we have anti-Semitism mutating from this classical, more religiously focused anti-Semitism to now being something that is related to pseudoscience, that is now related to a racist identity. So when we think about anti-Semitism today, at Stand With Us, we really like the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism, which if anyone is unfamiliar, I have it listed here. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, towards Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. And the reason that we go to this definition is because as a working definition, it also includes a number of examples that highlight the ways that anti-Semitism affects our communities, and it addresses the mutating nature of anti-Semitism today. Of these 11 examples, they go from harming Jews to stereotyping, scapegoating, Holocaust denial, and distortion. I'm going to breeze through this a little bit, and if we have questions about the IRA definition, we can come back to it. But then also the awareness that Zionism equals racism, which was Soviet-era propaganda, which was adopted by the UN and then repealed. The application of double standards when talking about Israel, the use of harmful symbols or images, comparing all of Israel to Nazis, comparing Israel to all of Jews, or making accusations of Jewish loyalty. We can see here that the types of anti-Semitism range from religiously rooted stereotypes, tropes that we might be familiar with, all the way into some issues relating to the Holocaust, into the racial applications, and then into this new mutation of applying this double standard to Israel, of anti-Israel rhetoric that is, masquerading as social justice language, but is actually harmful anti-Semitism. Now, this is not to be confused with legitimate criticism of Israel, which I would actually say is encouraged. It's healthy. Israel is a democratic state. Not everyone in Israel agrees with how the country is being ran. That is how democracies work. Legitimate criticism is incredibly valid, and we should not confuse this definition or any other definitions as saying that criticism of Israel is not allowed. However, when we look at the ways that harmful, we can even look at some of the language that we've even seen on college campuses recently about the ways that Zionism is purely being used as a replacement word for Jews in anti-Semitic historical tropes. I'm sure we're all familiar with it. And again, it's not to say that it is every instance. However, we can see that the shifting nature of anti-Semitism is falling in line with these mutations. As we continue looking at anti-Semitism, and now that we've built a little bit of a history, I want us to also understand from the recent audit of 2020's audit of anti-Semitic incidents from the ADL, we can see that in 2020, anti-Semitic incidents actually decreased, which might be shocking to anyone who has gone to any other presentation where you've been told that anti-Semitism is increasing, it's increasing, it's increasing. Well, it has been increasing over the past 5 years. And unfortunately, as we can see from this data, it would seem that the only thing that could prevent anti-Semitism from increasing in 2020 was a global health crisis. As we can see, COVID had a significant impact on the ways that students experienced anti-Semitism in their K through 12 schools. Even if you just look at the numbers from previous years, even of the incidents of harassment alone, or we can even look at vandalism alone. If you look at the difference between 2020 and 2018 or 2019, we can easily make up the difference of anti-Semitic incidents from 2019 to 2020. So I think that it is fair in looking at this data to say that the only thing that was stopping anti-Semitism from increasing was the coronavirus. And as we've seen from the recent May incident, anti-Semitism has been increasing in 2021 as a result of the different rhetoric online and in these different situations that our students have faced as they've started going back to schools. So when we look at this data, when we look at this information to see that anti-Semitism is not something that is dead and gone, maybe we could look at some more optimistic numbers of the early 2010s, but we need to understand that these issues are not going away. In fact, they are getting worse, and they are getting worse, as we can see from our map, in the exact areas where the largest Jewish communities in our country exist. To make this point, additionally, I mentioned before, we also work in Canada with Stand With Us, and according to B'nai B'rith Canada's annual audit also in 2020, we can see that across the board, anti-Semitic incidents are increasing in the areas with the largest Jewish populations. This is incredibly concerning, and it means that each of us need to be prepared to have these conversations with our students. And so now that I've told everyone a little bit about me and my experiences with anti-Semitism, I'd like to actually go in and have a discussion, and I'd like to hear from each of you. What are some of the types of anti-Semitism that you have experienced? What are some of the issues that you are dealing with in your communities?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Korlitz. I'm the Director of Gap Year Recruitment for Masa, Israel Journey. So it's nice to hear you reinforce Gap Year. And so one of the reasons that I'm here is because we at Masa have been talking about that year in Israel as empowering students when they return to college campuses. And everybody says, like anecdotally, and when you talk to Hillel directors on campus, they will all say that the students who are having that year in Israel do come back with, confidence and a sense of not only their Judaism, but also like a reality of what's going on in Israel. And so, I mean, I guess what I'm reaching out to you about, and that's why I was curious about this, is that, you know, it's so hard for kids to have conversations. And, you know, you're talking about, oh, we're going to have these conversations. So for young people who are put in environments where, you know, people are just reiterating, you know, the progressive narrative, the sound bites about Israel, specifically, not just anti-Semitism, but how it's you know, it's Israel. You know, we're seeing it. I was a college counselor. We're seeing it all the time. And so I guess that's why I'm here. And I don't know if you have something specifically to say about on college campuses, but that's sort of my major concern. I hear it from parents and kids all the time. They're afraid to go to college. So that's why I'm here.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And obviously the fear of going to college, I think that for all of us, our biggest goal is empowerment of students. And the end result of any conversation is you should not be afraid to be on a college campus. We often will get that exact question, where is it safe to send my student to school? And the answer is BDS can come up anywhere. Anti-Semitism can happen anywhere. It's not about protecting your child from reality. It's about empowering your student to have confidence in their identity so that when they encounter those situations that we cannot anticipate all of them, that they know that they have support, that they know that they have resources, that they know that they have somewhere to turn if they do not feel that empowerment themselves.
And I just want to say to you that Stand With Us is actually a wonderful partner with Masa. So thank you.
Does anybody else have any anti-Semitic incidents that have affected them, their students, their community?
I can share a little bit that we have, I mean, personally, the anti-Semitism that I felt has actually been from my past students, has been really my only interaction with it, fortunately. But in the work that we do, we have heard a lot from one particular school locally, and it's been a historic problem at this school. And it doesn't seem like there is a lot of motivation on the part of the admin or the school board to really do very much about it other than cover it up. You know, so for example, there was a swastika drawn in the bathroom there recently, and the response from the school was, we painted over it, it's gone, move on. So that's sort of what we're struggling with is, you know, we heard from a parent, and this parent doesn't necessarily want to push the boundaries to single out their children, but we also want to stand up for other Jewish students that are at this school.
And I think that that's actually something that we often see actually quite a bit at Stand With Us, because in addition to our resources for students on the ground, we also have a legal department that often gets into a variety of issues in supporting students in their communities and in helping address if there are next or actionable legal steps to be taken. And so in approaching these conversations, I think you're pointing to exactly an issue that we often face, which is, I don't want to ruffle feathers. You know, this is upsetting to me, but I want to kind of fly under the radar, or I don't know what I want to do about this. And I think that very similarly, the beginning point of these conversations with our students needs to acknowledge the issue of empowerment. I cannot force students to feel empowered. I think that this is, I personally maybe think that this is an issue that we have faced as a community for many years, saying that we need to prepare our students for college. We need to prepare our students for anti-Semitism, as if they're not experiencing it in their high schools. We need to prepare our students to be upstanders. We need to prepare our students to want to stand up and to say something about these issues, because each of them has the ability to combat hate speech. And it's very difficult to believe that, one, when you are experiencing hate speech, but two, when you have never necessarily had that experience before. It can be incredibly intimidating. So I understand the urge to want to sort of, well, they fixed it. They erased the swastika, but what about the next one? Who's going to say something? Thank you for sharing. Does anybody else have anything that's either affected their community or that they'd like to add?
I think for me, both as a teacher, but also now working with schools, is more of the concept that there are Jews. You know, one of the big projects I worked on when I came onto Federation in July was a calendar for our school districts of holidays, of not just of Jewish holidays, but Muslim and Baha'i and, you know, all of these different ones, because we'd already heard from teachers that they were having a hard time taking Rosh Hashanah off because it was right after Labor Day this year. And the number, you know, I reached out to the district, I was in communication with them, I created this whole calendar, I shared it with everybody. The number of teachers that still assigned tests and quizzes and big projects either day of holidays or the following day, just still blows my mind. I mean, I remember being in college and I had a professor and I was like, hey, I'm not going to be assigned a test. I'm not going to be here this day. It was Yom Kippur. And he accused me of making up a holiday. And I think that that feeling of being ignored, you know, we're in the South where if you're not Christian, you are, you know, othered. And, you know, I was a public school teacher and all of my coworkers, because I taught elementary school, had Elf on the Shelf and didn't understand why those things weren't appropriate. You know, I've got 3 nephews who are in public school, and every year I, you know, help my sister craft a letter to the teachers of, hey, there are holidays besides Christmas and besides Hanukkah, and that understanding just that there are other people, that there are people who aren't celebrating Christmas or have to miss school for whatever reason. And I think that that's a piece of anti-Semitism that a lot of us don't think about. Because it doesn't feel as important as, not important, that's not the right word, but, you know, it's not the same as, you know, a swastika being drawn. It doesn't have that same feeling, but it lasts for a long time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that's actually one of the experiences that in doing this session with our teens, one of the most impactful things that they get to hear is the variety of ways in which anti-Semitism is brought up. And to that point, I would actually say that, again, we're talking about a conversation about strength in your identity, pride in your identity, about our students feeling like they don't need to shy away. We're talking about empowerment, to not need to shy away from owning your culture, of owning your lived experience as a Jew, and your communal experience. And I think that for a lot of us who grew up on the North Shore of Chicago, that was never much of a concern. I think there was one instance, Leanne doesn't know I'm about to say this, but I think there was one instance where we were being taught to play Amazing Grace on the recorder that maybe we maybe raised an issue with one time. But on my father's side of the family, I had Holocaust survivors, and on my mother's side of the family, I had the awareness of anti-Semitism in Mobile, Alabama. And both sides of that coin highlight the varieties of ways in which Jewish students in diverse communities experience this kind of bigotry. And that's first and foremost what I want us to understand in exploring our personal relationship with anti-Semitism, and also hopefully hearing from a few different corners of the country. So I want to thank everyone for sharing. And it's often very impactful for our students to hear from students who don't share their community's experience with anti-Semitism, or fortunately, the lack of anti-Semitism. They aren't aware of it. They don't know what it looks like. They can't recognize it when it comes for them. And if they can't recognize it out in the wild, if they can't identify anti-Semitism, if they can't identify these different, we often say, tropes of anti-Semitism, if they aren't aware of this history, if they can't identify it for themselves, then it increases the feelings of otherness, it increases the feelings of trauma when they do come up against it. So I want to make this point about addressing trauma, because one of the things that we've started really intensely talking about at Stand With Us and with our students is what it means to be empowered, what it means to take this sense of powerlessness, what it means to take these feelings of uncertainty and to be empowered through education, in our case, and to be able to take that awareness either of Jewish identity, that awareness of the history of anti-Semitism, that awareness of Israel education, and to be able to apply that knowledge to stressful or traumatic situations. When we look at, thank you. When we look at the rest of my trip to Germany, my father and I were invited to present to a group of teenagers in a high school, very similar to the job that I was just starting at the time. This was November of 2018, that we were invited to speak to a class of German English students, an English class of German students. And we told them our family's story. We told them about anti-Semitism. And I speak to groups of teenagers for a living. I know what a group of disinterested and apathetic teens looks like. And I can tell you right now that for 3.5 hours, this was the most attentive group of students that I had ever spoken to. And I wasn't even a survivor of the Holocaust that was there to speak to them about the importance of combating anti-Semitism. And the thing that it highlighted for me is that we each have the ability to tell these stories, to continue these stories, to speak up in the face of hatred. And that is the kind of empowerment that we need to be able to impart onto our students as well. The other photos here for Kristallnacht, they put out stories of the different families whose names are on these Stolpersteins, these cobblestones. And we had a number of people come up and speak to us. I'm the bearded fellow in the hat. It was chilly. But again, this empowerment comes from the individual. When we look at the teens that we work with, the challenges that they are facing, I'm sure I don't need to tell any of you, but often we remind our community members that we work with that the challenges our teens are facing are oftentimes on social media. It's the fact that they are living in an age of activism, whether it is authentic or performative. And I want to be very clear that activism is not a bad thing. It is not bad that students want to get involved, but there is a lot of performative activism that is being thrown up on social media, and this increases the pressure of our students to speak up. When we hear things like silence is violence, it is not, again, inherently a bad slogan, but it does perpetuate this stigma amongst our students that they need to be saying something. Well, in order to say something, you should probably be informed about it. And oftentimes in an age of activism, in an age of social media where things are moving faster than we can get educated, there's a pressure to say something before you know something. What are the different sources that our students are turning to? Whereas we may have had success in the past telling them read articles from different sources, now it's primarily social media feeds. They also need to understand that they don't owe people answers when they are going through these different struggles. If our students are being put on the spot, they need to understand that even though they want to say something, it does not mean that they are a spokesperson for an issue. They can have their own opinions. They do not need to be put on the spot as the spokesperson, let's say, for the entirety of the Jewish community. I had this experience be brought to my attention by a student that I worked with in Minneapolis. It was a turnabout dance where a young woman thought it would be a good idea to invite her boyfriend, I guess, to the dance with sweethearts would be a Hitler with you, and I could not see myself going with anyone else. Now, when I was sent this photo, it was from a student at the school that she went to. And so I saw the photo that wasn't blurred. I saw these students' faces. These students posted this on their Snapchat. They posted it online. At absolutely no point did anyone think to just say, hey, this is a really bad, offensive idea. That's the power of identifying anti-Semitism. Just one person could have said, this is a bad idea. I really don't think you should do this. Instead, this story made national news. And if anyone didn't see it, I promise it did, because it was brought to my attention by our LA office. And I said, don't worry, we're already working on it. I also want to highlight the fact that our students are also looking for ways to speak out and to use their resources at their disposal. Our interns last year launched a page called For Jewish Teens on Instagram, where similar to Jewish on Campus, I believe is the campus page, but it's a space where Jewish students were able to post anonymously or submit anonymously their experiences with anti-Semitism, to give students a space to support one another online and to say, this is what happened in my school. This is what happened in my community. I look at these, I'm not going to read all of them. I'm sure everyone can go and try and find your favorite. I personally think it's appalling. I think back to my student from Louisville who talked about being excluded from the prayer circle before their dance recitals and eventually just being shamed into no longer participating in dance. I think about that when I see this kid came up to me in the hallway and asked, "You're Jewish, right?" Of course I said yes, and they responded, "That's okay, I still like you." Even these low level kind of things that students can look at and say, oh, I've experienced something like that. It didn't make me feel great. This has been a platform for students to share their voices, even to give them the opportunity to just see that other students are experiencing these kinds of issues is incredibly empowering. We often will also educate about the difference of intention and impact. And while we can think about different people, we can think about their intentions and how intention might be dictated by different types of anti-Semitism. It could also be determined that they are ignorant of an issue. They're apathetic to an issue. They either are being hurtful because they don't know better. They're being apathetic. They don't care that they're being hurtful. Not everyone is being malicious. And this is also incredibly empowering for students to realize, because of the classroom, the class of junior boys in the photo here from Baraboo High School in Wisconsin that was caught also on social media putting up the Nazi salute, I would venture a guess that the majority of these students were not trying to be anti-Semitic in this photo. They got caught up in a moment where they made a really bad decision. Unfortunately, that doesn't change the impact of what this photo represents. For our students, they are suffering from the impact of these issues, and it's the impact of anti-Semitism that causes trauma, induces fear, and causes that harm to our community. We need to be able to educate our students past the impact while also not excusing it. As we teach our students, I mentioned earlier that we need to be empowering our students. I'm often asked, what can I tell my students that they can combat this claim or that claim? And it's always an incredibly frustrating question for me to answer, because the answer is, well, it depends. I cannot give you a magic bullet answer that will always be the get out of jail free card for I'm feeling like this is anti-Semitic. Context matters. Local support matters. The empowerment of an individual student matters. And so that's why it's important for all of us. And it's why I want to thank all of you for being on this call and caring about this conversation, because our students require guidance, hand-holding, they require the support to work through these traumatic experiences. But the one thing that our students need to know that they can always say is that I do not owe you an answer to your question. I do not trust your intentions. I don't appreciate how you're speaking to me right now. I don't want to have this conversation with you. Thank you. They can remove themselves from that conversation. If the one thing our students are empowered to do, it should be to take care of themselves and remove themselves from what they feel like is a dangerous situation. Every single student should know this, because our goal is to have students who have pride in their identity, not who are going to be shuttered by fear, who are going to be stopped in the face of this bigotry. We want them to be eager to combat hatred. We want them to be experts of their own experience. We want them to offer education, and by being empowered, those students can be that upstander. But if the first time that you ask yourself is how am I going to respond to anti-Semitism is when you're being inundated with social media posts about how awful Israel is because of a conflict that's happening like this past May, and you know nothing about it, that's an incredibly intimidating situation. The first time you think about this, the first time you ask yourself, what would I do? You need to have at least one answer. And the one answer that we can give is, I don't trust the way that you're speaking to me. I don't want to have this conversation. I checked with our legal department. After you try to remove yourself from a conversation like this and attempt to continue to harass you, is literally harassment. I'm not just throwing around legal terms. It's actually harassment. You can go to the school and say, I've said I don't want to talk about this. They're continuing to harass me. You can take legal action, although we don't jump to legal action. That's a bit extreme, especially if it's like schoolyard issues. But also, if a school refuses to act, there are additional avenues of support. The first thing our students need to know is I have this in my back pocket. I want to share one more example that I think that proves my point, but I think it proves my point. I had perhaps the best intern I've ever worked with. And a week after she finished the internship, she texted me and she told me that she needed to talk. And she sent me this screenshot. I'm going to guess a former friend said that proves my point after they had been engaging in a discussion about Israel. And she said what she'd been trained to say, I see where you're coming from. Could we possibly talk about this via FaceTime or maybe even meet up for some socially distant coffee? I feel like I'm typing at you and I'd rather have a legit conversation because this is much easier to explain face to face, LOL. And in response, my intern was told, to be frank, I don't want to continue engaging in this discussion with you. Human rights isn't up for debate. You cannot educate me on what's right and what's wrong. Israel has literally committed war crimes against humanity, has committed crimes against humanity, against the Palestinian people. I can't and will never support the erasing of my friend's culture, history, and people. And I explained to my intern that first of all, she made it pretty clear she doesn't want to continue this conversation. We often think that we can explain to people why anti-Semitism is bad. We can explain to people why we want them to learn more about Israel or like Israel the way we like Israel. And this is very clear. I don't want to talk to you more about this. Great. But I want to draw her attention to the last thing that was said. I can't and will never support the erasing of my friend's culture, history, and people. The thing I want my intern to understand, the thing all of our students need to be empowered to understand, is that all of my student was trying to explain was her people's culture, history, and people. She wanted to engage in that conversation, and she was told no. It brought her to tears on the phone. We had to have a conversation about, you're not going to be able to change everyone's mind. But I found it incredibly ironic that it was exactly this statement, this erasure of her friend's people and culture, that was the exact point that my intern was trying to make. That is what empowerment looks like to our students. It's the willingness to stand up and say, I know my people's experience. I know my community's experience. I know my people's culture. I've learned that history. And instead of our students being afraid to speak up and share that history, our students need to understand that they should be brought in as experts, not attacked in their classrooms as the only Jew in class. I think it's sometimes happened to our students where every time Judaism comes up, the teacher or someone in the class will sort of look at our students. Maybe this has happened to you, maybe this has happened to some of your students, but that sort of glance over at the Jewish student, like, is that right? As if our students are the experts at the age of 14. And so I think that through all of this, through our presentation with the students in going through very similar topics like this, in exposing them to anti-Semitism from around the country, from around the world, exposing them to historic anti-Semitism, and then explaining to them exactly that issue of individual empowerment. Each of us has the opportunity to be able to create students who want to be upstanders and to be able to address these issues when they come up. And I think that we would be naive to think that we can perfectly prepare students for every situation that they will ever face, which is why it needs to begin with empowerment. And it's why we need to have a depth of understanding of anti-Semitism so that we can express that knowledge and transmit that knowledge to them when they might not be able to recognize it. Anti-Semitism, combating anti-Semitism begins with recognizing anti-Semitism. It then demands action, either from the community or from the individual. And I think that we should expect it from our communities. Anti-Semitism should be addressed. And there are a number of organizations that are doing exactly that work, including Stand With Us, but also organizations like the ADL, your local federation. There are ways to be bringing up these conversations. There is local support, and our students need to know about it. And then, once we have identified anti-Semitism, once we have acted on anti-Semitism or expected action against anti-Semitism, we should be able to have students and community members who are willing to be educators about anti-Semitism, because education is the one thing that prevents hate speech. And I don't think I have anything else necessarily to share, but if we want to do questions or if we want to engage in a further conversation, I think we can spend the rest of our time doing that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think the piece about empowering them in many ways, but I like how you shared, like, we need to also teach them that they don't have the answers. They don't have to have the answers, and that it's okay to politely, courteously walk away from a situation, either to diffuse it or to go and learn more and then return to it. But that I think a lot of adults do this too, but that they feel like if somebody says something to them, asks something of them, that they are responsible for responding, rather than saying, you know what, I haven't heard that argument before. I haven't studied that question before. Let me look into it more and come back to you. And so I think that's a really empowering position to encourage our students to take.
Absolutely. And thank you for highlighting that. And thank you for bringing that back up. I really do think it comes out of really, in many instances, what happened in May, where we received 1 billion questions from community members. What do I need to tell my child? How do I deal with this? How do I talk to them about this? They're being told this in school, or they've been asked this, or our students coming to us and saying, I got asked this question and I don't know. Did you feel attacked when you were asked this question? Or did you feel invited to participate in a discussion? Because if you're being attacked as a Jewish student for what's going on in Israel, you shouldn't feel like that in your school. You shouldn't feel like that in your community. The issue is not that you don't have answers. The issue is that you're being assaulted with these kinds of questions and in a manner that is inappropriate. Not because we don't want to have those conversations, not because the answers don't exist, but because it's an inappropriate way to approach a child. Whether it's putting them up on display in front of a class, or whether it's at a lunchroom table and between friends. It can be inappropriate. It can feel intimidating. And that's exactly the point that we want to make, is that you need to be able to remove yourself from that intimidating situation before you can feel empowered. Before we send kids out to go and fight BDS on campus, or before we go and tell them they have to go and promote the IRA definition of anti-Semitism and get it passed by their school board, they need to be empowered to want to act. I can't force empowerment on students. You can't force empowerment on students. We have to support them through this trauma. And it's very, very intimidating.
I have a question.
Please.
What if it's not necessarily confrontational, but they're scrolling through their Instagram stories and every single person is sharing something? I mean, I personally felt this, and I'm not a high school student, but I had my high schoolers come to me and say, my entire social media is flooded with, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic memes, basically. And I don't know, it's making me upset. These are my friends. Like, how do I talk to them about it?
It's an incredibly important question. I'm going to share one more time. Here we go. We have at Stand With Us, we have a website, and I can copy this URL and share it, but for reporting anti-Semitic incidents, and I believe that we have, yes, there it is. I want to report online anti-Semitism. And so if students are ever looking for somewhere to report something or they want to take action, I want to highlight this as a resource, as something that students should know exists. But one of the answers about online anti-Semitism is if students can identify anti-Semitic incidents and if they can explain why, which again requires an awareness of anti-Semitism. But if students can understand why something is anti-Semitic, they can use reporting tools on social media to say, I want to flag this is anti-Semitic, et cetera, et cetera. And they should feel empowered to do that. I'll just share that reporting tool for anti-Semitic incidents through the Stand With Us website. And so if they want to take action, which sort of goes beyond, they're empowered, they want to act, here are a couple of ways that they can do it. I'm sure that there are also local resources or organizations that are concerned about exactly these types of issues, especially depending on either what group it's in or if it's at a school. But the students need to know that they have support. There's really, in many instances, nothing you can do about online anti-Semitism. There is, there are support groups. There are groups online that I actually was exposed to one that made me feel a lot better, because it was a lot of like-minded people echoing my frustrations and complaining about online anti-Semitism, and it made me feel better. But unfortunately, there is a certain amount of vitriol online that we cannot necessarily police as thought police. However, when it does cross that line, students need to know that there are tools and there are people who care. And at Stand With Us, we do have that reporting tool, and we do have a team that if something is actionable, we would like to try and help if we can. The unfortunate answer is there are some things that we can't help. And this goes into a conversation with our students that we all need to have, just about, we can't control what other people say all the time. We can't control what they do, but our best tool against it is education. And when it feels, again, when it feels intimidating, when it feels like we're not being listened to, that's a very lonely feeling. I can't be heard, I can't speak out. And the answer is not, I'm going to post online, I'm going to hope that people support me in the comments. It's about a DM to a friend. It's about saying, look, you shared this, or I'm frustrated because I'm seeing this. And it's about being able to say their piece to one person. It's about being able to speak with you or with other youth professionals to say, this is what I'm experiencing. What do I do about this? And it's the honesty to say, I'm seeing the same thing in my circles, and it's frustrating and it's difficult, because our students are again, they're not looking to us for answers for questions we don't have answers to. If we're working on this issue together, they should be part of that process, and they should be empowered to know that they have every right not to feel intimidated online. And also sometimes take a break from Instagram. I saw it's like, if you hate everyone around you, eat. If you hate yourself, nap. And if you hate, what is it? I don't remember, but it was essentially that. And I think about it on social media as like, if you realize you hate everyone, maybe close Instagram.
Mel, did you have?
Yeah, I just, there's something that so when I was a senior in college, I was president of my Hillel and vice president of the student body and vice president of operations for Alpha Epsilon Phi. So I was like a very prominent, active member of the Jewish community at my college, and like a face kind of, like people knew that I was Jewish. And the fall semester of my senior year, a freshman dorm was graffitied with swastikas. And so it was like a really hard time for our students, and a lot of people were like reeling, and I was president of the Hillel, and it was the night that like the student body as a whole found out. Like I knew pretty much as soon as it happened because of my positions and things like that. And the student newspaper and like all these people kept on reaching out to the members of my Hillel board like that night and would not get off their cases. Meanwhile, like these kids were literally scared to go home. Like we're talking about the freshman dorms. We're talking about like their homes at our school where they're supposed to feel safest. And so I ended up calling those reporters to community standards of my college because just the way they were acting was like so inappropriate. And because in situations of leadership, like teens and young adult leadership, so like teens and college students, I think we have a tendency to kind of forget to remind them to like think of their mental health first. So while it's really important to empower our students to be like upstanders and to know like what to say and how to handle these situations, it's just as important to have conversations about like, if it's not going to be good for you, like then remove yourself, like, and that is okay. Like combating anti-Semitism and anti-Israel, like on Instagram is not only your job. It doesn't fall only on your shoulders. And there are so many other things that you can be doing that may be more helpful to you and more educational to the people you're trying to speak to, because that's something I'm always trying to remind my teens of, is that their mental health is literally more important than anything. So that's the deal. I like think that that can be lost in translation when we're talking about like teen advocacy sometimes. So that's my take on it.
And I want to thank you for sharing that as well, because one thing that the Stand With Us team actually did this past year was our high school team, I believe our campus representatives as well now. We've all participated in youth mental health first aid training. And the slide about trauma is actually something that was added. It's been like a very core piece of what we've been working on, including because we've all realized exactly that fact, that students are often being pushed to be leaders, to be in these positions, to be speaking their minds. But I think about some of the anti-Semitic incidents. You know, I mentioned we went to Germany a week before our trip was the Tree of Life shooting. And I was going to speak to German teenagers about the issue of anti-Semitism 80 years ago. But it was an issue today. It was an issue in a community that I visited a lot from my previous work. And I didn't know how to process that. I often find as a youth educator in these spaces dealing with these issues that the first issue I have when something happens is I don't know how I'm going to explain it to the teens. And I often think about exactly that issue as I think about how they must be feeling. So I want to thank you for adding that point. And also, I usually come back to Pirkei Avot, Lo Alechem Lecha Ligmor, right? Yours is not to complete the task, neither are you free to desist from it. And I think that it's incredibly important that our students understand that they have the ability to make a difference. They don't have the obligation to be the only person making a difference, and they shouldn't feel alone. And that's why I do my job. And I have a feeling that's why all of you do your work as well. So again, I am now overtime. So I'd like to thank all of you for participating in this call. I'd like to thank Erica and JTEEN again for hosting us and for having us and for facilitating this. And I'd also like to give another plug for the program that was mentioned earlier in this event that will be taking place this evening at Congregation Beth Shalom in Northbrook, Illinois.
Thank you, Adam, so much. Thank you, Stand With Us. And you are a beautiful storyteller. And I think it really helped us get that full picture, and that you brought it back to what is it that we can help our teens and how can we support them, was just a really powerful way to move that. So thank you so much for joining us today and leading us in this conversation.
And I'm just going to, Natanya, just in response to your question, I'm going to leave my email address if anybody wants to send me an email or request further information. adamb@standwithus.org.
And Leanne put that link in the chat too. So if you wanted to join in tonight, she's got 400 at least screens that are joining in. So what's one more? Come on, people. All right, have a great rest.
Can I just add to that someone had asked, and I said that if anybody who registers for the program, they're allowing me to send out the link to the video tomorrow. So if you can't be there in real time, they're allowing me to put out the video. So you know, feel free to sign in even if you can't log in tonight, and that way you'll get the email tomorrow.
Very good. Thank you all. Be well.
Thank you.